the voices that propel us, stories of justice, action, and community. A space where justice meets action and community voices rise. Each episode, we bring you stories from the front lines, changemakers, disruptors, and everyday heroes who are building a more just, equitable, and liberated world. This is more than a podcast. It's a call to listen, learn, and move together. You were just listening to music from the incredibly talented Stephen Kong. You can find him on Spotify and Bandcamp. Today we have with us Eden Lima. Eden is a passionate seeker of truth, equity, and self-empowerment whose journey into social justice began as a teen navigating the chaotic, often hostile terrain of the internet. Raised in a biracial home by an American mother and a Guatemalan father, Eden witnessed the forces of ignorance and bigotry early on, and chose education and curiosity as tools of resistance. From online subcultures to real-world movements, they've always been guided by a desire to right injustice wherever it shows up. A transmasculine changemaker who came to his identity later than many of his peers, Eden's path has been shaped by resistance, introspection, and the courage to question deeply held norms. Growing up Mormon, he spent years in religious therapy that denied his dysphoria, delaying his ability to live fully in his truth. But his story is not one of defeat. It's one of reclaiming power through knowledge, self-definition, and community. Okay, hi Eden. I'm really excited to have you here. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good.
Okay,
I'm really
cool.
good.
Now I'm excited to learn just more of your journey. I think you have
Mhm.
such a powerful story to share. I really do appreciate you taking the time to be here and sharing your story.
Of course, it's a pleasure to be here.
Okay. Cool. So just to start off, you've described yourself as a seeker of truth and equity. What moments in your early life first woke you up to injustice?
You learn about racism and stuff like pretty early on in school. I feel like most like 3rd to 5th graders, like that's when you usually learn about it. You learn about like MLK, you learn about things like that. I think very early on, I noticed kind of like injustice and just I feel like growing up here and everything like that. You see a lot of it with poverty. There's a lot of poverty here. Even people who aren't like impoverished, you know, they still see like the effects of it and everything like that. I witnessed a lot with whether it be like just how certain people are treated differently in school, how people would, bully based on like, things like race or religious background, stuff like that. People would, kids are mean in school and stuff like that. I saw my fair share of that. I was never too much of an early target for things like bullying based on like race. I was more so I was just a very awkward kid. It was a lot of targeted stuff, whether because like it was a pretty diverse area growing up in. Like there's a lot of kids, like Black kids, Hispanic kids, a large immigrant community. So I feel like even if somebody didn't relate to another person on like a shared cultural basis, like at least they have the thing of like, oh, like your parents an immigrant, my parents an immigrant too. And so I feel like it was both people found connections with each other that way, but they also found like ways to get under people's skin based on those experiences and stuff like that. And I feel like a lot of bullying and stuff that I witnessed on that, it was a lot of, I feel like I'm like, that's not you talking. I feel like that's like a bigoted parent, or like you're repeating rhetoric that you don't understand yet. And I feel like it's just heartbreaking to see like kids, being mean like that. And I'm like, you shouldn't even know what that is yet. Like,
Totally. No, that's cool. And when you saw those like different things on like the playground or just how people were treated, did you make those connections even as young as you were to like larger issues of injustice, or did you still just see it like as more personal? Because I think that's amazing for you to have that sort of like awakening when you're so little.
I definitely I made the connection. I feel like pretty early on with some people are treated differently based on like background, whether it's financial background, racial background, cultural background, anything like that, religious background. Like I feel like I noticed kids would get treated differently based on some of those things. And there was a constant pattern of like I feel like the people that I witnessed get the biggest brunt of it, I feel like were a lot of kids who were experiencing poverty. I feel like it's very obvious when like a person doesn't care too deeply about a child and will let them, like, because I remember like when my mom, whenever everything like that, like she would always be like, she's like, oh, I don't want you to have like your hair in your face or like snot on your face or anything like that. She was like, I don't want you to look like no one's taking care of you and stuff like that. And as a kid, I hated like thrash around and be like, get off of me. But later on, like that's another thing too, is like how people looked like when you first met them or presented themselves, even if they were a nice person, if they didn't meet like somebody's expectations of what was considered like acceptable, right, whether it be just like clothes or maybe sometimes hygiene, something like that, people would ignore a lot of those people and stuff like that, where and I feel like kids, they don't have words for it, but they're very good for picking it out. Like they sense that stuff right away. And I made a connection very early on though between those injustices, and then also like I feel like in a lot of Hispanic communities it kind of comes with it, but just like colorism, like I feel like any community, like any community like that, I feel like they suffer from colorism a lot. And you see a lot of that early on, because I'm like I was very tan as a kid, but I remember being like told, like in my church and stuff, like people would always like compare me to, growing up Mormon, people would always compare me to like, they're like, oh, your ancestors are the Nephites or the Lamanites, which are like the people in the Book of Mormon who native Mesoamericans technically. And like I have family from Guatemala and everything, and so like I was constantly getting compared to that by church leaders, like by fully grown adults. And like some of the worst stuff that I heard was actually from other Hispanic people and stuff like that, because I feel like they felt like they had free reign, I guess, to say whatever they wanted. But like I was hearing stuff like that, and like hearing about how there's also a connection in the doctrine about skin color and that based on how like good or pure you are. A lot of the older doctrine really emphasizes that. And I feel like seeing colorism both socially and in my community, and then also in a religious community and stuff like that, I feel like that really kind of like it affected me in ways that I feel like I can only realize now after the fact. But
no, I think that's really sad. And I think that happens, I've seen it a lot in Asian cultures as well. Just like I feel like that standard of beauty is more towards like whiteness. So even like Asian just cultures, them buying skin whitening products, and just a lot of colorism happening there. So I'm glad that people are starting to like dismantle those like stereotypes, and just even with my own daughter, I try to teach her like a way of like, whiteness is not the standard of beauty that you should be like going towards.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I tell my little sister that all the time, because she got like, she has really really curly hair, and I always make sure I'm like, never let anyone tell you that your hair is ugly. Like never let anybody tell you that like your hair is like crazy or wild or like can't be tamed, or you need to cut it because it's so like curly and stuff like that. And I'm like, I never want her thinking she's ugly, or associating those words that people will call her hair with like herself, like, because people, they see someone who's different and they automatically assume like, oh, this is different, so it's bad or unhygienic or something like that.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing. So just speaking a little bit more about that, growing up in a biracial household, what lessons about identity and resilience did you absorb early on?
Me being mixed, I feel like was a big like thing that differentiated me from a lot of my other friends and stuff like that, whether I had because like I had friends of like all different backgrounds and stuff, and I had a lot of growing up in the neighborhood and stuff like that, I had like there was another family who lived down the street and had a little girl who was around my age as well, and her family was just Mexican, and my family, my mom is white and my dad is Guatemalan, and I feel like even with other Hispanic people, like there was even still a divide, like there was a divide, because it's like, oh, I wasn't like Hispanic enough for a lot of the people there, because like I looked a little different, I didn't speak Spanish fluently, my mom's white, and like then with like with kids who were white and stuff like that, it was still also very obvious that I was not fully white, and so I just kind of felt a little not fully accepted, or I didn't feel quite accepted or rejected fully from either community, because I felt like I had like a place, I had like a foot in each, if you will. Like I had, but I feel like I could have done a lot more as a kid to connect more with like my Hispanic side and stuff like that. My dad tried teaching me Spanish. He said I didn't want to learn. I I don't know if I buy that, but learning the language or learning how to cook the food, or like I've only recently been in Guatemala, and seeing how my dad grew up and seeing how some of my family still lives and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I feel like I have like a better understanding of it now than I did as a kid. But I feel like it was overall, of course, it was a gift. I wouldn't trade like my background for anything else, because I feel like I get like some good from each side. Plus two, I feel like I even amongst other Hispanic people, I stuck out a lot, because most of my friends in school who were also Hispanic were Mexican, and like that's most of the time, if you're Hispanic here, you're Mexican. So I would feel like a little bit left out of like not quite getting stuff that's like uniquely Mexican or things like that, but sometimes I would feel left out in the like by white kids as well, because they wouldn't fully understand like I've had like the whole like, what are you eating, ew, that's weird, like thing before and stuff. And
kids are so mean sometimes.
So. Yeah, no, they can be really mean, and like, but yeah, I feel like it really informed the way that I was, because like I had cards in both games. Like I can understand. I feel like it gave me a gift too of understanding like intersectionality more, and understanding intersectionality is the main big one.
Yeah, because
I'm like, oh, it's not just an isolated problem to one community or one class or one religion. It's like there's a lot of patterns that overlap. Yeah.
No, I love that. But just going into your religious background, so you grew up Mormon and spent years in religious therapy that denied your dysphoria. So what impact did that have on how you saw yourself?
Oh, it had a very, very large impact. So I had a therapist, and she was an older woman. She'd been doing therapy since the 70s. And I feel like she was very much one of those people who thought, because that she's been doing this so long, that she knows like everything that there is to know about therapy, and that she doesn't need to like continue her education with mental health. Like you could tell she had very 70s view of mental health and mental illness and stuff like that. And I don't know if this, like, looking back on it in retrospect, she also was she was a person who was also used to dealing with like criminally like people who committed crimes who have mental health problems, and just to like evaluate them and stuff. And I feel like because of that, she had this very okay next like style of therapy, where like you would go in and you would feel like you were rushed through the hour, and you'd feel very rushed through the hour. But this lady, she was also in the LDS church, and I feel like this is like another thing with the church. Like people put so much they have so much trust in other Mormons that they've never met before, and I feel like that, like, implicitly you lower your guard a lot more when you have that mentality of, oh, this person shares the same faith, I'm safe with this person, or my kid is safe with this person, or something like that. And I feel like that's a common thing in a lot of churches, and I feel like that's like a very big open door for like abuse to happen. But this therapist that I had, she would I would tell her, like, I don't like this thing, and it was always some expression of femininity, or some way that my biological gender was really like highlighted, and like it was very much, no, you are a girl. And she would print me out talks from general authorities in the church, from like conference and stuff like that. She would print out these talks that were always by they're always by men, and they were talking about how much of a gift femininity is, and how you, and like all this stuff. And I still remember she was like, oh, like, I remember her telling her, I was like, oh, like, when I go to church and I have to put on a dress, I feel so uncomfortable. I'm like, it literally feels like I'm like I'm like in like a trash bag. I'm like, I feel like I'm like, I have to like crawl out of my skin. Like it was the most crippling feeling of anxiety and like I need to get out of here like feeling I've ever experienced. And of course with the words now, that was dysphoria. Like that fully was. And I feel like any competent like psychiatrist now or therapist now would recognize that as gender dysphoria and stuff, you know. Oh, like, and plus, you know, I've always had more like masculine interests. I've always aligned myself with more like masculine things, just with like expression and stuff. Even as like when I identified as a girl, I was never a feminine girl. I never enjoyed being pretty, anything like that. But yeah, no, she would print me these talks, and she said that like, oh, because of the way that you were, she also like weaponized kind of my like abuse that I experienced in the past against me.
Wow.
Where she told me, oh, you actually you feel bad about you've been like conditioned to feel bad about your femininity, and you actually need to lean more into your femininity because of it. So I took that advice, and it almost killed me. Like it, like for years after that, like if she hadn't have told me that, and I actually had like even a decent therapist who would have said maybe that's something similar to dysphoria or dysmorphia, like, you know, because I feel like it also could have been interpreted that way as well. I had a lot of body image issues as well. But like it set me back probably, I would say, years in my progress with realizing I was trans, because she said, oh, because of the way that you grew up, you saw femininity as a weak thing and as something that is weak and makes you vulnerable. So you reject your femininity now. And I tried to correct her, you know, I don't see femininity as a weak thing. I know I'm surrounded by strong women. I've like, you know, I like would seek out those examples and stuff as a child, looking for, you know, strong female figures. And it was always like, it was always very much treated as like, oh, like that's so sweet. Anyways, like, you know, they kind of move on from it very fast, of like, especially when young girls and women try to like, you know, empower themselves through their femininity. And, you know, I always try to tell her, like, you know, I don't see femininity as a bad thing. And like, even at the time, like I told her at the time I was a lesbian, and I was like, I don't view femininity. I'm like, I'm literally like attracted to it. Like I think femininity is like a beautiful, powerful thing. And I was like, how would you explain that? And she also was very much like of the mindset of like the whole thing that Mormons care, like think of about being gay or being queer. They always use this term. They say same-sex attraction. And that's basically become a dog whistle at this point for like anytime I hear it, it's always in a religious context, talking down on like the gay community or the trans community, it's always just talking down on them. And it feels very much like, oh, silly gay person, you're not supposed to do that. And it's like that mentality and that mindset that kills people will think that they're wrong their entire lives and hide themselves away for literally their whole lives just to make other people around them comfortable.
No, thank you so much for sharing that. So just like I felt like it took a lot just for you to like have that courage to break through like those messages you were given. So what helped you to begin to trust your own inner voice over external expectations or doctrine?
I feel like a lot of that was talking a lot about like, you know, my experience in the church. I want to like highlight that it's not like everybody's experience. Like, you know, if you meet another like trans or queer exmo, like that's what they're called, ex-Mormons, exmos. If you meet another exmo that's like, you know, in the same situation that I am, they might not have the same experience, you know, like it varies, you know, stake to stake. You know, I know like it varies, you know, race by race too. Like the church treats people very differently based on race. And I know it's something that they don't want to acknowledge, or they say, you know, like it's the whole thing of we don't see color, but it's like you need to at least be aware. It started with a lot of little things and little gaps that I was seeing in like, you know, doctrine, where even as a child where I didn't have answers, I at least had like questions that were very like, you know, frowned upon. I would get like, it was very like, even if I wasn't directly reprimanded for asking those questions, it was seen as very shameful. You shouldn't you shouldn't ask them, especially like I remember in like the seminary setting. Seminary is it's different from other seminary like religious practices. Seminary for Mormons is basically when you're in high school, so your freshman to your senior year. You go 4, sometimes 5 days a week to the church building, at least an hour before school, and you have an hour of scripture study. And it is mainly scriptures. Mormons don't really study the Bible as hard or as intensely as other religions, other like sects of Christianity. But we would go there, and like I remember the first, I think it was my freshman year, it was church history, which the church values its church history. They have a whole section of it in the Book of Mormon and the Doctrine and Covenants. There's like different books that the church has, and the ones with like we would read the like church history books and stuff like that, and they would teach a lot about how the church came to be and all the stuff that like it happened, and they would just tell how it happened, supposedly, allegedly. And I like, to me it didn't make a whole lot of sense. Like I would think about it, and I also like would realize like I like as a child and stuff, of course you cling to your faith really strong. Like I would say from like since I was born till like ages probably like 10 to 11, that's like when I was really in the church. 11 is when I really started questioning it, and I was questioning it so intensely that like they always tell you not to seek out, they call it anti-Mormon propaganda. And that's basically a catch-all for if it says anything negative about the church, it's not true. But the thing is, the things that they are saying about the church are documented historical happenings that did happen, that they're proven by historical documents, by historians. There's so much academic proof to disprove the church. And I'm not telling people that don't be Mormon or anything like that. Like I know a lot of people use a lot of very like strong language around it, and like I am careful with what I say about it, because I still have family in the religion. Most of my family is still Mormon, and I also don't want to like confirm. I feel like if when you say mean or rude or blasphemous things about the church, especially to somebody like a missionary, you're only confirming the biases that they have, that there is no good outside of the church. And that's what you're told, like that you're never going to find true happiness outside of the church. And that's something that like I'm still very much given that same message, that I'm like, I'll tell people, oh, I'm the happiest I've ever been. Like I'm no longer passively suicidal. I'm like I'm doing a lot better ever since leaving the church, getting on hormones, all this stuff. And like a lot of Mormons would just, smile, grit their teeth and be like, oh, but that's not real happiness. Actually our churches, what you're experiencing is fake. And when you realize that, and that you're a dummy, you'll come crawling back. It like it very much feels like it carries that same energy. And, like there's very much like the Mormon, like I call it the Mormon glaze. And it's like a very common term online where people like Mormon people, they have this, like, they filter everything through this, this thing of, okay, but I have to be happy, and I have to, spread joy and the light of Christ. And like, that is a very big responsibility to constantly put on yourself, that you have to present yourself as a mouthpiece of God at all times. And they always tell you, oh, you're always a missionary. You're always a missionary. From the second you're born, you're a missionary. And, like it's just this messaging that's so ingrained in you that like even questioning it, because it's very much, they want you to put your identity and your beliefs, they need to be intertwined. That's what it is. And like, so that part, it was so hard for me to kind of break out of that mindset of like, I'm not going to be struck dead or anything because I asked a question and stuff. Like that was a thing I very much had to get over. When I was around like 10 to 11, I had a Kindle Fire, like one of those dinosaur ones that like the old
talking about,
the old Kindle Fires. And I remember looking up questions, like asking, like I would open up like an incognito tab, and I would Google questions about the church, and I would like read at night and stuff, and like I would keep it on like the lowest brightness setting, hide under my blanket, and I would Google stuff, and then I would wipe it, sometimes I would be so paranoid and so scared that I would factory reset the Kindle, and then I would keep it under my bed or under my mattress.
Okay.
And like, you know, I would do that, and I was like slowly learning more and more about it. And the more that I learned about it, I was like, the more awful I felt about being at church. Like I just felt even more out of place. And I would look at all these people, all these like smiley, happy, shiny people with their perfect lives, and I would be like, you know, it's impossible for somebody to be that smiley, that happy all the time. And, you know, and people now in the church will be like, well, I get sad. Like, the church is more open about mental health now.
Oh, that's good.
I do agree that that is a very good big step.
Yeah, totally.
You know, they're like, they started it very much like in my generation. Like when I was a little kid, I feel like that's when they started having like different conversations around it. Because before it was just like, gay, don't do it.
Yeah.
Depressed,
yeah.
Look to God, pray. And it's like, you know, like depression is a disease. It's a literal chemical imbalance in your brain to where you physically cannot feel happy. You cannot produce enough happy chemicals. And, you know, when they started viewing it differently after a bit. I think that's a good step, but like just the way that I still remember like, and I feel like another thing that also helped me was just talking to more people. Like I feel like the internet also goes hand in hand with that, because I was looking on, you know, like other blog posts and stuff like that. I was looking on like I was looking at like different YouTube creators and stuff that were like early people in like the Exmo like circles and stuff. I consumed a lot of ex-Jehovah's Witness content as well, because I felt they were very similar.
Because I was born and raised Jehovah's Witness too,
you know. But yeah, and like talking to people, and then also I feel like one of the very big times that it kind of like, because you know in ex-religious communities, you know, they have the allegory of the shelf breaking, that, you know, when you have a thought about this religion that you're not quite sure if it's true or not, and you don't want to think, but you put it on your shelf. Then over time you add more and more things on your shelf, and then your shelf breaks, and that's when you're like, oh this isn't true, or I've been lied to my whole life. And you know, you feel this sense. And I feel like especially with ex-Jehovah's Witness and ex-Mormons, I'm like, it's one of those things where it's like you're supposed to live and breathe, you know, that faith and that religion. And if you don't, there's, you know, big consequences and stuff like that. And, you know, there's some people who will literally be like, you know, they'll be like, oh, you're gonna have to answer for all the blasphemous things that you say in this lifetime. You're gonna have to answer to God and stuff like that. And it's, you know, I've with those people and stuff like that, most of the time it's a very specific genre of person saying that, where I'm like, oh, you're not happy with yourself, like you're scared of God, like this God that you are claiming is so loving, you are scared of. And I can very much tell, like, you know, the difference between a person who's very like, you know, earnest in their faith and, you know, I feel like, because, you know, there's good and bad of every religion. Like I'm not saying that like all Mormons are inherently bad or anything like that, but I feel like when you get out of that mindset and you finally realize that you don't believe in it anymore, it is world shattering. It is. And there's a big correlation. I honestly would want to do a study, or I would love to see a study of the correlation between ex-Mormons and OCD.
Oh, that's interesting. I never made that connection.
Yes.
What do you think would make that connection though?
I feel like the very big one is just like, to put it bluntly, a lot of the rules of Mormonism and beliefs that you're supposed to follow and everything, they suppress free thinking. They suppress critical thought, and they suppress questions and stuff like that. And I feel like you are just, you know, it's very, and like a lot of the stuff too that, you know, I never did too much temple work, and, you know, I won't talk about temple work for the sake of, you know, people that I know who are Mormon, but it's very, very like, you know, ritualized. It's very like it's, you know, it's done in a very methodical way. So I feel like a lot of the temple work and stuff that is like, you know, very methodical. And then also there's this thing of like, it's a very common message that you see in the church too, of like, other Christian religions do this as well, where they're like, thinking the thought is just as bad as committing the sin.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Mormons also kind of have that thing of like thought control.
Okay.
Where they believe, they're like one story that I remember them always telling and stuff like that was, like when some biblical story where like a king sees a woman bathing on a roof or something, like he sees her from the window, and then he wants to sleep with her, so he has his like guards fetch her, and then he brings her back to the kingdom and sleeps with her. Okay. And they were always like, when was the sin committed? Like they would say, like, when was the sin committed? And some people would say when he acted on it, like bringing her up. Some people would say the actual like act of them sleeping together.
Okay.
People, especially Mormons, would emphasize, no, it was when he thought about it. That is when the sin was committed, is when he thought about it.
Okay.
And I feel like, and again with that whole thing of like Mormonism is ingrained into your identity when you're Mormon.
Yeah.
And so when you realize that it's not real, it is so world shattering of like, oh, I've been lied to for so long. And that's when the OCD, I feel like, really ramps up for some people. Because I have other Exmo friends who also are diagnosed with OCD. Okay. And there's also people, content creators and like actors, two that I can think of off the top of my head, Alyssa Grunfeld on YouTube, on TikTok. And then Jeanette McCurdy. I read her whole book. She grew up Mormon and she's also diagnosed with OCD.
Okay. And
so like those, like, I think it's really about the whole thought control. It's really about like the whole, like, I feel like some of the like first things that I ask, like, cause I have a friend who also has OCD and she's ex-Mormon. And I asked her and I was like, did you also have like one of baby's first intrusive thoughts be like, you're trying to pray and then you start thinking all these swear words and you're like, I'm sorry, God, I didn't mean that. I don't know who that was. I'm sorry, God. And then like, and like that kind of stuff, that is like budding OCD. And, there is a correlation in there somewhere. And I feel like I'm like, there's a research paper in there. There's a study in there.
you should write. I'd read that book that, if you wrote that. That's really cool that you made that connection. But yeah, so you came into your transmasculine identity later than many of your peers. How has that shaped your sense of timing, patience, and or urgency in life?
I've always felt like I've been a little behind like all of my peers. I was a good student in like grade school, but then after that, I really just struggled. And I feel like I would have to work twice as hard to get the same results as somebody who like barely put in any effort. And I feel like, I feel like when I first discovered or kind of figured out that I was transmasc, I was like, I kind of felt like I looked back in retrospect and I was like, oh, okay, that's what all of that meant. And like, hence why I said stunted growth from my therapist. Right. But I was like, oh, that's what that felt like. And for a while I felt very like silly or almost like stupid that, I was like, oh, like it was this thing all along. Like, cause I literally remember like I have this like very specific memory. I loved Flipnote Hatina as a kid. Okay. And I remember talking to a person on Flipnote Hatina, and they had done this trend. I look on their profile, and they had done this trend where like it was like you add your character to this like Flipnote thing because they're all animations, right? Okay. And they had a base, and you would add your pride flag, and then you would add like your gendered flag or whatever, like with whatever gender it was. And I remember like looking, and I was like looking at all these things, and at this point in my life, because as like a little kid, I was taught into homophobia. And, I kind of feared it more than anything. And I remember like at this point I was kind of, deconstructing a little more. I was probably about like 11 or 12. And I remember seeing this person's like whole like profile thing. And like they had the trans flag as like one of their things. And I was like, what's this flag? I was like, I've seen it before, but like, what does it mean?
Oh, okay.
And they were like, oh, and they explained it to me. They explained what being trans was and everything like that. And the first person I had ever heard about at that point who was trans was Caitlyn Jenner.
Oh, okay.
Which I feel like, and like, I'm like, if you know Caitlyn Jenner, I'm like, that's a horrible first like trans person to be exposed to. Cause I'm like, and cause like, it was right when she had come out. So like everybody was talking about Caitlyn Jenner. And, I had friends who had said before too, like they had talked about, Caitlyn Jenner, and one of my best friends in the whole wide world and everything like that. She was like, I don't know what I would do if somebody came out as trans who I knew and who I loved. And like I'm still like me and her, we are not sisters anymore, but like me and her, like we were inseparable as kids. We were like we are like family. Like my mom always jokes that that's our goddaughter.
Okay.
And but I remember thinking about that, and I remember like in my head I was like, remember that, because that's important later. And I didn't know why. I didn't understand why. And I just remember in my head, I was like, this is going to come back up again later. And that's actually the reason I didn't come out to her for 2 years after I realized I was trans, because I was so afraid of losing her.
Yeah.
But later on, I realized, I was like, oh, you have gay friends, you have trans friends, you're chill now.
Okay.
But
That's cool.
yeah. But I because a lot of people who I knew who were trans, they had discovered that they were trans in like middle school or high school. And I think I was probably like 16 or 17 when I had realized.
Okay.
And for a few years at that point, I had been identifying as a lesbian. And in like the lesbian like circle as well, I was very much more like butch than like I was ever femme or anything like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, also because of that, like lesbianism, I have a very like special place in my heart for it, because it really opened my eyes to like what the queer community can be.
Right.
And yeah, and plus lesbians have done so much for the queer community and like their history and stuff like that. And so like, learning about that, learning about just all of the queer history that there is.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, like there was always some lesbians behind the scene who were working their asses off to get people the rights that they have today.
Yeah.
So,
thank you for sharing. That's awesome. So how do you define community today, and how is it different from what you imagined when you were younger?
I feel like my perception of community has definitely changed over the years. I feel like as a kid, my idea of community was, what I immediately saw. I saw, oh, my brother has neighborhood friends. That's community. I have a church that I go to that I see people often, and we help them. They help us. That's community. I thought, community was like, from a very early age. And I feel like it's in a lot of like POC cultures where people are like very like, giving, people love to get together, people love to, stuff like that. And like, our neighborhood and stuff, there was a lot of other Hispanic families, we'd always exchange food and stuff. And like even still to this day, like our neighbors and everything, we know all of them, and like we still exchange food and everything. My neighbors behind us, they're Filipino. So we always get longanisa, we get pancit, we get all of that, and it's great. But like community, I feel like to me now is, I feel like at the heart of community there is tolerance, love, and strength in numbers.
I love that. That's really cool.
Yeah, because and the tolerance, the reason I say that first, and this is one thing that I had like it took me a few years to kind of discover this, is you're going to be uncomfortable with some people that are in your community. Sometimes you're going to be uncomfortable. You're going to have disagreements with people, and especially, and I feel like this, you see this a lot online with like a lot of discourse and a lot of like, especially like LGBT infighting. I feel like that's a big one, because like especially now I'm like, do you really think that a God-fearing Trump voting Republican is going to look at like a person that you deem like the wrong kind of trans, like whether like you think that like you're like, oh, you're not really trans unless you go on hormones and you live as a stealth person and you're like a binary trans person. Like I'm like, you don't see the difference between like neo pronouns, like ear wearing, like colorful hair trans people, and like a trans medicalist who is like hardcore binary like trans medicalist. They do not see the difference. They want both of those people dead.
Wow.
And I'm like, and if we're gonna have to stick, and like especially times like this now, and I'm just using the LGBT as an example, but this goes for all community. I'm like, especially now, we need to stick together more than ever. And I'm like, you're going to be uncomfortable. Okay. You're going to be uncomfortable to people. Like revolution is not comfortable. You're going to have to make sacrifices. You're going to have to bite your tongue a lot when some of these people will say things that you might not quite disagree with, but it is not going to be all like rainbows and butterflies. Let's sing kumbaya. And I feel like a lot of people, especially, and like, I feel like it's more people my generation who they're more used to online activism, where they're used to just starting a argument with anybody, and that argument can go for hours. And I'm like, when that's different in like a real person setting, because when you have that like detour from your goal, your end goal, whether it's like, changing your community, or it is a revolution, like taking away, putting your energy towards infighting only harms like you and your community. And like, and there is some exceptions where I'm like, there's like things that you draw like a hard line on, of like, oh, if this person is this thing, I can't align myself with them. That's different. I'm talking about people who like you might have like minor disagreements with, but you think that everyone has to be comfortable. That like, oh, but this person, they, people will be like, it's a lot about like, the what about me-isms of like, well, I need to be comfortable. Well, how am I included in this? And it's like, I understand, like, and I feel like that also goes hand in hand with like, like hyper individualist, like American culture, where people always kind of want to have their like main character moment, especially when it comes to a lot of people, especially online people's like view of like revolution or community organizing. I feel like tolerance is a big, big thing that people are just so not used to anymore, because like everyone is very hyper individual. And I feel like even the most, like even people who probably don't think it, I feel like it's like a spectrum. It's not like you're self-absorbed or you're not. I feel like there's a big spectrum of that because it's just been ingrained in so many people's like American brains for so long.
No, totally. Thank you for sharing that. And so what do you think people misunderstand the most about intersections of faith, queerness, and activism?
I think that people don't realize that, well, I know people do realize this, but I don't think they realize it on the level that they need to, that like, there are good and bad like people in every religion. And, I feel like a lot of people tend to think that, oh, you specifically, you tend to be very critical of Mormons, of Christians, things like that. And I am, but like those are the faiths that I have the most experience with. Those are like the ones that I've been exposed to. I've grown up in them. I feel comfortable being critical about these things. But, I might not have the same understanding as like when people like talk about like, there's like ex-religious people like everywhere. And, it's more rare when I come across a person I'm just using this example, who's like, like ex-Muslim or like Islam, or like they used to study, they're no longer practicing, stuff like that. And like once you get like down talking to it and stuff like that, you see a lot of ongoing patterns with how the extremist parts of those religions tend to be, of like, it's all controlling. You have questions, no you don't. Okay, it's like a lot of stuff like that. And I'm like, this is not just unique in Abrahamic religions too. I'm like, a lot of religions have this, a lot, even like new age like spiritualist stuff will sometimes fall victim to like very Western ways of thinking, I guess you could say. But the intersectionality too of like, there's a lot more religious queer people than people realize. I feel like especially a lot of very conservative people tend to view queer people, trans people, as, a lot of like, God hating or like atheists or things like that. But I'm like, first of all, a lot of people did grow up in those environments. So I understand both sides of the story of like people being like, no, I want to reclaim my faith. Like me and God are tight. Like I feel comfort in God. I feel at home. I feel at peace now that I'm at home and at peace with myself. I hear a lot of that from a lot of like trans people specifically, who they will rediscover, God on their journey and stuff like that, on their journey of self-discovery. Or a lot of people really, really, really identify with Jesus. Because like, I mean, like, of course, I've gone into my whole thing before about like how I believe Jesus was a whistleblower, how, he was a revolutionary for his time in like the way that he knew how, which was through religion. He saw people using religion, and he saw people of his religion using religion to justify not doing anything and not to do much. And like, it's more about like the word of the law than it is about like who's actually being helped. And then he also saw the effects and how the negative effects of, the Roman colonization of his homeland. And I feel like those two things, when you bring them together and everything like that is a very, powerful, image that I feel like it conjures up and everything like that. And I feel like, a lot of people identify very heavily with Jesus because, you know, at the bottom line of like his whole thing was love. You know, the biggest commandment that you have to follow is love. So I feel like, you know, in turn, because, you know, a lot of trans people specifically, you know, you have to do so much self-reflection to come to that conclusion of, I don't feel like the way that I am being perceived and the way that I'm expressing myself is correct. And if I don't fix this, I'm going to die. Like, and I feel like so many people do not understand that about like transitioning. Yeah. Like transitioning saves lives. People are horrible, awful people. And then they discover that they are trans, they transition and they blossom into these beautiful, empathetic people.
That's really beautiful.
Yeah. And I just feel like, you know, also like, and the part about activism too, I feel like, you know, anybody can be an activist. You know, it doesn't matter your background. I feel like the more the merrier. Yeah. You know, I'm a big Star Trek fan. I love the IDIC, you know, infinite diversity, infinite combinations.
That's cool.
And, you know, diversity too, like that's like, you know, when you have so many people part of so many different backgrounds come together and stuff, I'm like, that's when the most progress happens. Yeah. And that's when society, I think, is most beautiful, is when you have so many people from so many different backgrounds collaborating on a collective effort. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. No, thank you for sharing. I love that. So what does living fully in your truth look like for you now?
I censor myself a lot less.
Okay. That's
I wouldn't say completely, because I have like levels of like how uncensored I am with most people. And like, I feel like there's a level of uncensored that I only get with like, maybe like, you know, my partner and like maybe my best friend, but like, that's like it. But like, I feel like I'm a lot less censored. I'm a lot less closed off. I'm a lot more outspoken. Especially with like, you know, like family members and stuff like that, who, if somebody says something that I don't think is correct or I want to ask more about it, I used to just hold my tongue because I was so afraid of being perceived. Yeah. I was like, as a teenager, you just look at me and you can tell I wish that like the ground would open up and just swallow me. Like I hated being perceived. I hated being around people. It gave me the most, like I was just a bundle of nerves and anxiety. You know, I can really say that a lot of that calmed down and a lot of that stopped when I stopped going to church. I stopped going to church when I was 18. I would have stopped a lot sooner if my parents had let me, but like I feel like, you know, not having a religion that was harmful to me, not having that in my life anymore, finally being, you know, transitioning, that was a big one for me. I feel like I'm coming up on 2 years on testosterone. Okay. So like that, I feel like that's a really specific thing to grow into your own skin. Yeah. Because like I feel like it's both in the way of like when I left the church and also when I like was transitioning and stuff, I had the same feeling of like there was this knot in my chest that I did not know was there until it was untied. Okay. And so like when I finally got that relief of like, this is what I'm supposed to feel like, this is how I feel at home, this is how I feel comfortable, you know, being perceived as, you know, a masculine person, being perceived as a man, like it was life-changing. Like, you know, like I had said earlier, I had just gone on my first trip ever to Guatemala. Yeah. And while I was in Guatemala, I passed very well. Like it was almost like it was to a point where like I was avoiding using bathrooms at all because people would give me weird looks if I went into the ladies. Yeah. Like you know, I was getting, like, I remember one lady, she like, you know, you take the paper in to the bathroom before you go to the bathroom in Guatemala. Okay. And we're at this one place and this lady, she was like, she hands me some toilet paper and then she points behind her and she's like, caballeros aquí. And I was like, my dad like gave her a weird look and was like, no, damas. And, you know, like the ladies' room, pointed to the other one and stuff like that. And she like gave him a weird look and then I just like scurried off because, you know, like she perceived, because like, I feel like too, that's like a very different thing of like, you know, if somebody looked at me here and stuff in America, I feel like they could clock me more as trans or at least that I'm very visibly queer just because like, you know, I have facial piercings, like I dress more alternative and like I'm like, they can like, you know, pick me out in a crowd and be like, that one, like they can, and, but like in Guatemala, I feel like they didn't have that like mindset. And again, I think I think there's a link in there of like maybe possibly, you know, like the rise of conservatism here. People are more on edge because I mean, transphobia is not just affecting trans people, it's affecting cis people as well. There's been countless stories that I've seen in the most recent years of cisgendered people being harassed because people think that they're trans. Yeah. And sometimes, it's people who are cisgender, heterosexual, and they're just trying to pee, but somebody's like, you look different to me, and that makes me uncomfortable, and I'm like, sometimes these people will be physically harmed. And it's like
no, thank you so much for sharing your journey. And I really hope that people listening will like be inspired and also feel empowered enough to like live their own truths as well. So, thank you so much for that. But so with that, what advice do you give people who are questioning norms or feeling pressure to conform? Like what would you say that they should do?
Look back to history and look back, whether it's like social history or like historical figures or, things that are more recent or happened a long time ago, and look at the people who went against the grain at the time and what it did for the social and political climate of the time, know, because like sometimes I look at the, social and political climate and I feel really helpless, and I'm like, I can't just not do anything. Right. So, that really will give you that drive and that fire to be like, well, people are saying this thing is correct, but like, I feel like, you can cut this if you want to, but like the part that I, see now, especially with things like ICE and, what the new administration and stuff like that is doing, I'm seeing a lot of very worrying patterns, and I'm seeing a lot of things that like, just being a history buff, I'm like, I've seen these patterns before in history. Yeah. I know that it's only going to escalate from here. And given the political climate and also technology is more advanced now more than ever. Yeah. So it makes people empowered. They have to work like they can work less to get the same results that somebody would have gotten, handful of years ago and stuff like that. Like, really, really look at what other people were doing at the time, and, people who were going against the grain, and, people who, were always marked as like weird or, like, oh, that person's crazy for like the beliefs that they have and stuff like that. And, like some of these people, like the ideas that they were having, we would think of them now and be like, well, yeah, of course that's bad. Like, there's things that people never are bad. Like, yeah, slavery was bad. Yeah. Child exploitation, that was bad. There's a lot of things that I feel like, regardless of background, a lot of people can agree on. Yeah. And, but those ideas, like the idea of, like rights for Black and brown people, or rights for, like I said before, children. Yeah. Things like that. If you said that to someone 200 years ago, they would laugh you off the planet. Like they would think that is so weird and stuff like that. But I'm like, look at just how, like, in just 200 years, which is a relatively short time for history.
Yeah. That's what I've learned as I've gone older. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, it's just such a small window. And, like looking at these things and stuff, and I'm like, we're only progressing faster. Yeah. And I'm like, look at what's being, and I encourage everybody to like any media that you engage with, it is intentional. It is so intentional. Every single like thing that you see on TV, every single thing that you hear on the radio, every single thing that you see online, it is intentional. Somebody has some sort of motive that they are getting behind there, whether it's they're trying to sell you something, they're trying to sell you an ideology, they're trying to sell you a way of life, they're trying to give you a key to some like, they're trying to give you a key to happiness. In a lot of those spaces, think critically about what these people are telling you and what the further implications could be. Because I feel like a lot of, especially young people, right, like the peer pressure, especially now, like the thing that I've noticed, young people are afraid to be perceived. And I understood that because I did not want to be perceived when I was younger. People now are so afraid of being perceived that it's like stunting them on a social level. And, like, I'm like, once you kind of figure out that you do not have to feel shame for every little single thing that you do, like you have been conditioned to do, because I feel like that's a big thing people have now, is just shame and guilt. I'm like, once you realize that, some basic like human things that everyone has to do, like, like you're not embarrassing for existing, like, like, and it's one of those things that I feel like, once you realize that like shame for existing is optional, like that opens up so many doorways. Opens up so many new ways of thinking. Yeah. And stuff like that. And I feel like, people hang on to those anxieties forever because it's uncomfortable, but it's familiar. So I just encourage people, listening and stuff like that, like really engage critically with everything. Yeah. Every piece of media, every song, every book, and and like challenge yourself. You are a lot smarter than you think.
Yeah.
You can understand a lot more than you think.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that wisdom. That's really wonderful. And I had a really wonderful time talking with you today. And just lastly, how can listeners better support trans and biracial youth who may be navigating familiar struggles such that you shared today?
I feel like one big thing is, especially with trans people, and even if a person doesn't end up being trans and they're just exploring their gender identity, and I feel like that's a big thing that people are talking about lately too. A way to support these people is just to like, listen and be there, and also ask like, what can I personally do to help you? And also make sure to ask like boundaries on top of that as well, because some people will be like, I want to try out these pronouns, but I only want to do it with these people because these are the people that are safe. And like keep like, and I feel like especially now, like if you know someone who is trans, no you don't. If you know somebody who is gay, no you don't publicize that. Don't be super outspoken about that, like especially like outing, because I feel like that's a lot of thing that cishet people don't quite get is unless you have someone's explicit permission, like just don't talk about their queerness, their transness to like anybody. But supporting especially youths, I would say to any like people who may have like kids or siblings, especially like social transition, it can help a person discover so much about themselves, even if later on they're not trans. Like if a person, because I know about a lot of people who in middle school or high school they identified as queer or they identified as trans. A lot of people who were identified as trans then, and then 2-3 years down the line they're like, this isn't me. And they're like, I kind of miss who I was before. Like I like this style, maybe I like it's just literally finding what you like and what feels comfortable, whether it be something like fashion or whether it's something deeper like gender or sexuality, and just being that non-judgmental open book. Or like don't be afraid to ask questions too. I feel like that's another thing. People think that a lot of trans people, like especially there was this whole like triggered SJW move, like social media movement forever ago, that I feel like a lot of people have this idea about like queer and trans people in their heads, that they're like, if I breathe wrong at them, they're going to be like, you misgendered me, that's a hate crime. I'm like that is not the case with the majority of trans people that I know. I'm like, ask questions, like if you don't understand something, be like, hey, I have a question that I want to ask. I'm not sure how it's going to be perceived, but like can you at least like help me with this or something. Like my own dad, who he's an older man from Guatemala. He doesn't quite understand like everything about being trans and stuff, but he'll ask me questions and everything. He's helped me with my hormones. He's also a nurse, like he's helped me with my hormones before. Don't be afraid to ask questions, and just be supportive, and like ask how you can be supportive, and then do your best to be supportive in that way. That's literally like the top thing I can think about. And this is kind of more of a silly thing, but it's also genuine. Like whatever name this person wants to go by, even for a little bit, even if it sounds silly, if it's like whatever it is, okay, just entertain it. Because I can guarantee you, trans people will try on like minimum 3 names before they settle on one. Because like I used to change names like I was changing my shirt. Like I like cool. Yeah, like that's one that I can think of. Yeah, just whatever name, they want to go by Sock, let them go by Sock. Who cares?
Okay, well, it was really wonderful talking with you today, Eden, and thank you so much for sharing just your journey and your wisdom and everything. And I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for being here and tuning in to Voices That Propel Us, stories of justice, action, and community. Your presence in this movement matters. If today's conversation moved you, share it, talk about it, and keep the work going. Together, we're not just imagining change, we're making it. Until next time, stay bold, stay grounded, and stay in the fight.
Every time I feel so mad and sad and bad, I say to myself, relax, lean back, it's a brand new day. And every time I feel so down that a frown is all